SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Maybe there's a very good reason the world is shaped like a football. The most popular sport in the world is soon to finally kick off for its 2025-26 season, as we are only days away from the start of the Premier League. Suddenly, everyone's minds are again spinning around football, and the football universe draws us in like a force stronger than gravity. However, this won't be just another season, as it will be the last time betting brands can be displayed on the front of league teams' shirts. With Premier League teams having agreed to a ban on front-of-shirt sponsorships from the gambling industry, there's a new challenge for companies to promote their business and for teams to maintain their revenue. This new scenario sure creates a lot of questions. Will gaming companies find a way to still promote themselves through football? Will more countries adopt these types of regulations? Is the earth actually round like a football? Will Arsenal ever win the Premier League again? Welcome to iGaming Daily, where today we will try to answer some of these questions, probably not all of them. I'm your host, Fernando, Noodt, media manager for SBC, and I'm joined by iGaming expert, journalist Christian Lee. Christian, how are you today?
Yeah, good, thank you. Well, fantastic intro as well. First, I'm happy to be here.
And also happy to join us is Kieran O'Connor, I'm sure, business journalist for Payment Expert and Insider Sport. Kieran, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. And to answer one of your questions in the intro there, Fern, I don't think Arsenal will ever win the Premier League again.
Okay, you can, of course, this is a message to our listeners. If you are an Arsenal fan and want to insult us and hate on us, make sure you do it by interacting to this podcast in any platform you are hearing it, whether it's YouTube or Spotify. Share it and say, hey, these guys are idiots. So yeah, feel free, but you have to interact with the podcast to hate on us first. So before we move on to the question that is most important, what will happen with Premier League sponsorships and what the business model will be from now on with this self-imposed ban. Let's thank Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market and sponsor of iGaming Daily. So, speaking of sponsors, it has been a while since this self-restriction by the teams was announced. Kieran, why don't you remind our listeners what this whole thing is all about and what are the details?
Yes, you are right. It's been quite a while now. There's obviously been a lot of discourse. I know myself and Christian and yourself been covering a lot of it on our respective sites. So it actually originates back from 2023 when the ban was announced. Premier League clubs, which is obviously the English top flight league, collectively voted to ban front-of-shirt gambling sponsorships, and that ban will take place at the end of the season coming up, so the end of the 2025-26 season. So teams have 1 year left on these sort of contracts if they want to get them through the door. I'm sure we'll be speaking about that later on. As you mentioned in the intro, it specifically targets front-of-shirt sponsorship advertisements, so that means that other sponsorship areas are still available. That's sleeves, training kits. You can put it on the side of a buzz if you want to. You can do everything like that, just not front of the shirts. And this move, let's try and cast my mind back all the way to 2023. I believe that this move was largely preemptive. There was a lot of discussions and a lot of pressure on the government to move forward and enact stricter legislation on sporting clubs and their relationships with the betting community. So the Premier League sort of took it into their own hands before the government may have enacted even strict regulations and said, look, because we're the good guys, we will volunteer to ban front-of-shirt sponsorships, and that sort of kept the pressure off them for a while.
And of course, Christian, you recently actually wrote an op-ed about what this means for the betting and football relationship going forward. What do you think about the restriction? What's going to happen?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I think it will have some impact on visibility, given the fact that the front of the shirt is the most prominent place for a sponsor to be. However, I think in a way, all it sort of does is just shift gambling sponsorship elsewhere. As I wrote in my piece, Leeds United, they announced that Parimatch will be their shirt sleeve sponsor. And I just think this is a sign of how gambling sponsorship will change in football now, because gambling is so entrenched in football at this point that even if they do bring, when they do bring this front of shirt sponsorship ban in place, gambling brands will just find another way to be involved through deals such as sleeves sponsorships or training kit sponsorships. And even when you look at the training kit sponsorships, they could even be more valuable than front of shirt, given now how much social media content that teams put out through the week when players are training, when they do the press conferences, pre-game, things like that. So it's just a case of, I believe that gambling sponsorship will stay within football and they'll simply move to different parts of a team's kit or a team's sort of match week, and it'll just stay just as valuable for the brands and for football.
You actually used a very interesting term for what's coming for betting sponsorships, which is arms race, which I think is very clever, because while, of course, sleeve deals are going to be like the top spot probably for football going forward, or for betting brands actually, since they can't put themselves in front of the shirts. So while they will be fighting for that spot, the front of shirt space is losing a major bidder in football. Do you think this will have a negative impact for clubs' economies?
I think that no, because I think that especially the Premier League, it's such a big business that there'll be plenty of other sectors who are willing to fork out the money to get their brand on the front of Premier League shirts or get their brand associated with Premier League clubs. Kieran, you might be able to speak about this more than me, but you look at things like fintech sector and especially crypto, they're sectors that have a lot of money involved and will be willing, I believe, to sort of forge new relationships with football and take the space that's been vacated by gambling companies.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, on the surface, it's quite easy to see this front of shirt ban and say the Premier League clubs are going to lose out on a key sponsorship and investment agreements. I mean, throughout my whole life, you can think of certain kits and you think about the front of shirt sponsor, and it's usually a betting brand. And that's been the case, well, up until this ban. But the reason for clubs going towards these betting sponsorships is usually because the betting brands often pay an increase over the club's fair market value. So there was a great article on SBC News written by Jake Pollard, who sort of cited research from the industry magazine called The Sponsor. And they picked out two deals. They said that the Aston Villa's recent sponsorship deal with Betano represented a 13.6 million increase over the club's fair market value, while Nottingham Forest's 14 million agreement with Kieran Sports is more than double the club's fair market value for that deal. So these betting sponsorships often pay more. So you could then think, well, if they're exiting the market, who else is going to come in and pay that? I know we're going to speak a bit more about the wider industry, but in the Netherlands, a similar thing has happened where they sort of put a far-reaching ban on clubs advertising anything to do with the betting industry. And it was estimated that these clubs would lose around 70 million euros. So they're obviously going to feel the impact. But I feel like with football, they'll always adapt, like in other industries. As you mentioned, Christian, there's other industries and sectors that will see this ban as an opportunity. But will they pay the same amount of money that these betting brands have traditionally paid? I'm not sure. But with the viewership numbers still going up for the likes of the Premier League, there's no reason why football clubs can't quickly find a substitute. Or, as we noted before, they could just swap the front of shirt for other deals like the sleeves or the shorts or training kits, so they can make that money back in other places.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be plenty of interest in betting, in sponsoring the football teams in the Premier League. I mean, I'm based in Argentina. I'm Argentinian. We have a strong league here, and I grew up watching the Premier League either way. So it's a very popular league. And there's also other countries, weaker leagues, that actually people tend to be fans of European teams. And the Premier League is, of course, a major target or a major watching point for these people. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty of interest for brands to be still sponsoring front of the shirt in English teams, or in Premier League teams. But also, there have been some warnings ahead of this season by the Gambling Commission about the sponsorship deals with several unlicensed companies to some of the teams in the Premier League. Have any of them actually taken any action about it?
Yeah, so just to give the listeners a bit of context, earlier this year, TGP Europe, which sort of licenses other overseas operators through a white label, they ceased operations, which sort of then affected a bunch of operators who have sponsorship deals with Premier League clubs. So you had the like of Newcastle United's deal with Sportsbet.io affected, Fulham's with SBO Top affected, and Leicester obviously not in the Premier League anymore, but their deal with BC Game was affected at the time. And there's another 2 or 3 also affected. The thing is with the Premier League and the regulations around it, they're quite funny. When we're reporting on this, it sounds quite bad. So a club is being sponsored by an overseas betting operator, which no longer has a license to operate in the UK, meaning that the domestic fans aren't allowed to access that website or place bets with them. However, there's not really much that the regulators can do in terms of action. The only thing that they require clubs to do is to make sure that the domestic fans, as I just mentioned, aren't able to access the betting operators' websites, usually through geo-blocks, and they have to make sure as well that they can't access it quite simply just through a simple VPN service. So to answer your question, there's not really been much impact on the clubs who have been caught up in this sort of terrible scenario of advertising these usually Asian casino-facing brands which aren't even available in the UK.
Yeah, I reckon they have a different objective with their sponsorships in the UK. And this, of course, opens a much larger discussion about responsible gambling, about player protection and all that. But it's a wider discussion and we won't be covering that today because we have to do a very quick ad break right now. So Arsenal fans can go find us on TikTok and insult us there. Remember, it's iGaming Daily Podcast on TikTok. You should find us and leave your comments there. So we'll do a very quick ad break and we'll be right back.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
And we are back with more iGaming Daily to discuss betting sponsorships on football, primarily because of the self-imposed Premier League ban. But we have, of course, been discussing sponsorships in the UK. But I think we should be taking a look to the rest of Europe now. What's the general situation across the region?
Yeah, so I think elsewhere in Europe, gambling sponsorship is a huge part of football. Some data I was reading from The Guardian is that 2/3 of teams across 31 top divisions have at least one sponsorship deal with a betting firm in some way. So this shows that money from the gambling industry is sort of intrinsically linked and is financing large sections of European football. 14 of 31 leagues also have title sponsors that are betting related from the data that The Guardian was analysing previously as well. So this shows that European football in a way can't really afford, or a lot of leagues in Europe can't really afford to go down the same route as the UK because the whole league is being financed in a way by betting sponsorship. So it's certainly an interesting time.
And we have had countries like Italy and Spain enforcing bans on betting sponsorships. Of course, Spain kind of like going back and forth with that, but Italy actually enforcing it, even though betting brands have found their way to go around this ban. But both these bans came from the government, whereas the Premier League was a self-imposed ban by the teams. Which model do you reckon will be more likely to be adopted by other countries?
I think it will be a mix, to be honest, because I think if you look at the wider European gambling market, a lot of them are maturing and becoming stricter in terms of regulations in place, and part of that is looking at advertising regulation. So I think it may well be a case of footballing governing bodies and footballing leagues sort of having sort of direct conversations with the government and with regulators within these countries about what they can do regarding advertising. So I believe it will be a mix of both in terms of if the league is more proactive or if it's a government-led decision.
Yeah, in the meantime, we have Bet365 signing a 3-year deal with the UEFA Champions League, and Betano sponsored the Euro 2024. So there's still, for sure, appetite for betting sponsorships in football.
Yeah, there's definitely appetite for these sort of deals. I mean, the good for both sides when done right. You've got the betting brand putting their branding and their advertising in front of a lot of potential consumers, and for football clubs and leagues, they're getting usually a lot of investment, which they then can spend on improving the game, even at the grassroots level. There's also initiatives that these partnerships usually bring, helping charities and stuff like that. I mean, turning away from football for a second, if you look at darts, you might be able to comment on this more. Christian, I think it was Paddy Power did raise about £1 million for prostate cancer.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so these deals aren't all bad, and they're not the villains of the story all the time. But one question I sort of have for you, Fer, and Christian maybe, is you have these deals at the European and the international level with betting brands now. Does it sort of make these other leagues, like you spoke about Spain and Italy and the Premier League, do these bans lack teeth? Because what's the point of having a ban on the domestic league, and then when the international competitions where everyone's watching it together, you have the betting sponsorships?
Yeah, it's certainly a good point, because imagine if a team lifts, say, like the Bet365 Champions League trophy, but they're not allowed to have a betting sponsor. It sort of does call them into question. I think it's interesting as well in Italy, where we've mentioned about that there is a ban in place. As part of that online gaming shake-up in the country, there is talks that the sponsorship ban from sports betting companies may be repealed. So as a lot of countries go one way, it looks like Italy may actually be going in the opposite direction, which is an interesting development to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it definitely lacks teeth, the ban in these countries with big teams competing at the larger stage like the UEFA Champions League, because you have teams with betting sponsorship coming over to your country and play week in and week out. So it definitely creates an issue for regulators that are trying to keep the betting brands off screen, and all of a sudden you have other teams, bigger teams, competing in the Champions League, coming to your country and play. But that's an issue that's probably across several sports, like Formula One. You had the stake team that had to change to kick because they had like issues with countries with this type of regulations, or even countries with larger issues with betting. So the betting companies are not at that stage, I think, but still they are facing probably a good scenario going forward because of these struggles that regulators have to enforce this type of ban. And speaking of struggles, I'm going to move away from Europe a little bit and talk about what's going on in Latin America, where this betting sponsorship discussion is also a very much important topic in the general public's agenda, not only in my country of Argentina, but also in Chile, also in Brazil, because most teams are having deals, or are signing deals rather than with betting companies. So the general public is looking at this and saying, hey, what's going on with this? This segment is growing. Will this be an issue? And I think the industry needs to step up in these countries that are still developing their own industry, and educate the people and saying, hey, okay, look, these are the brands that are allowed to operate in your country, in your market, and this is how you should be playing. You should not be playing more than you can play, etc., etc. And still, they haven't reach out to the authorities as much as I think they should have, because you have Chile pushing an all-out ban, even though that was delayed in the Senate because of the presidential election. And then you have Brazil, which has just enforced their regulatory framework this year. They also are pushing for advertising restrictions, even though those are delayed as well in Congress. So I think the industry needs to do some work from within, not only to analyze how they want to promote themselves within these markets and every market in the world, actually, but also to get in touch with the regulators, with the lawmakers, and letting them know, hey, this is what we bring to the table, and this is how we should be doing things. So it's not a very aggressive marketing strategy, but at the same time, you don't cut not only the possibility for regulated betting brands to be out there, so because unregulated betting brands will still promote themselves without any prerogative. And also you'll be cutting the funds that come into football, which in South America are very important because, of course, we are very much behind Europe or the US or other markets that have more money and are more competitive. So the betting money is, of course, of a lot of help for these countries. But moving now away from football, do you think there are going to be any other self-imposed bans like the Premier League or any type of measures like this in other sports, or is this too specific?
I think it's too specific. I think a lot of other sports can't really afford to shun money from the betting industry like football can, just due to the size of the markets in football. If anything, I think the other sport could maybe see this as an opportunity to get more money from gambling sponsorships, as these gambling companies still have the same marketing spend. They still have less avenues to spend it now, so it could be a trickle-down effect where other sports receive more money in terms of sponsorships because there's that money that needs to be spent by the gambling companies. And
back to UK football, where do we put attention in terms of sponsorships ahead of this season? What do you think will happen with the teams that have betting sponsors on the front of their shirts? What do you think the companies will do?
Yeah, so in terms of UK football, and especially, in terms of the Premier League, we're seeing a lot of teams they're still dedicated to these partnerships with gambling companies. I mean, if you look at West Ham, for instance, they had a deal with Betway that ended, and now they've replaced that now with Barrel Sports as a front of shirt sponsor. So they're not looking to move away just yet. A lot of these deals obviously end at the end of this season when the restrictions will come in place ready for next season. But I think we'll see them move to the shorts and sleeves, and I think some clubs will get quite creative in where they place these sponsorships.
Yeah, I think so. I also think that it will allow clubs to put more value on these sleeve sponsorships and training kit sponsorships. Like before this came to place, I don't ever really remember. I can't think of any like sleeve sponsorships, maybe Visit Rwanda and Arsenal, just because it's been debated quite a lot. But it's not something that I've really thought about. But now, because of this issue with removing the front of shirt sponsorships, it becomes a much more valuable location, the sleeve or on the training kit. So if anything, it's a commercial opportunity for football clubs to up the cost of getting a brand on the sleeve or on the training kit or as part of the match day somewhere.
There's certainly a lot to consider ahead of this 2025-26 season, but for now, that's all from us here at iGaming Daily. Thank you very much, Kieran. Thank you very much, Christian. And thank you very much, Anaya McDonald, for producing this episode. To our listeners out there, make sure you subscribe to all SBC Media newsletters so you can keep up to date with all this information, and also follow iGaming Daily on all related platforms. And of course, we are on TikTok. You can watch some snippets on TikTok, iGaming Daily Podcast. So you should find us there. And of course, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily Podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.